Yo, I hope you guys are doing fantastic today. In this video, we're going to be covering some major changes coming to New World in regards to fortification. So if you don't know, New World has a massive patch right now on the PTR that's completely changing combat. It's shaking up the meta a whole lot. And one of those things that is changing is fortification. They're nerfing fortification quite a lot. This isn't just shirking fortification. This is fortification as a whole. And I'm going to show you guys what that means for you and your build moving forward. Because you may want to rethink your build a little bit. You may want to start getting prepared, because I do fully think that this is going to make it to live. Now, full disclaimer before we get too deep into the video, yes, this is based on PTR information. So that means anything on the PTR is obviously subject to change. So take all this how you want. I fully believe this change is going to make it into the live, or at least some iteration of this change for sure. I do fully believe fortification is going to get nerfed quite a lot before it goes to live. So I'm going to show you guys what this is. Before we show you the numbers, though, I want to tell you guys exactly how we performed this test. One of the things we did is I pulled in a friend. We tested this both on the PTR and then on live. What we did is I had a buddy respec completely, get naked, take off all gear, all armor, so there was no chance of proccing any kind of empower or any kind of other buff. And then completely respecking all abilities, so there were no abilities that were proccing any kind of empower or anything of that sort. And then he would hit me a few times to get a baseline of damage. So we did this about 3 times to make sure we were getting baseline of damage. And then I would proc fortification. I was using the hatchet. I was using one of the passives on the hatchet to proc a 15% fortify. Now, one of the things I want to point out that may be a little bit different whenever this hits live is that there are certain abilities that are not going to be considered fortify anymore, to the best of my knowledge. Right now, the way I understand this to work is that some abilities that are in your tree, if they specifically say fortify, they are going to grant you actual fortify. And then there's going to be a different type of damage mitigation. For example, like Defender's Resolve, it doesn't specify it's fortify. So I think that is now separated from your fortify. So I think that's going to make that ability quite strong. But for purposes of this test, we used just a hatchet passive that did give us a 15% fortify. And we tested this with light armor, medium armor, heavy armor, and I want to show you guys the difference. So again, he would hit me a few times. We'd get a baseline of damage. I would proc fortify, and then he would hit me again with my fortify buff active, so that we could see how much more damage we mitigated. And then we took that as a percentage to see the actual damage mitigated. And it was quite crazy. So the way it currently works on live right now is that the number that it says it mitigates is usually very close to what it actually mitigates. So for example, if my hatchet says if I'm gaining a 15% fortify from a hatchet passive, that mitigates 15% damage, or in that neighborhood, roughly. Somewhere in that neighborhood is what is supposed to happen on live. On the PTR, on the other hand, we do know from the patch notes that that's going to be different. It's going to scale off of your armor rating, and it's going to scale up the heavier you are. So in light armor, you're going to get less fortify, and then as it scales up, you're going to get more and more and more. And then whenever you're in full heavy, you should get the maximum amount of fortify you can from one of those abilities. What this means is that you're no longer getting that base value. So if something says it's going to give you 15% fortify, it's not going to give you 15%. It's going to give you a smaller percentage, because it is going to scale based on what your armor rating is. So I'm going to show you guys these numbers right now, and we're going to go over them, and then this is all going to start to make sense, and it's going to be pretty eye-opening. This is very important to your build. If you're running shirking fort in your build right now, if you're relying on a lot of fortified buffs, this is going to change everything for you. It's going to shake up the meta quite a lot, so you might want to start getting prepared now. All right, so now let's show you guys the results of the test. So we'll start with live first. So you can see here on live, I was getting hit for 1,311 damage whenever I was in light armor. That's without a fortification buff. Whenever I proc the fortify, I was then getting hit for 1,086. That's a difference of 225 damage, and that means that I was mitigating about 17% of the damage, which is roughly what we would expect with a 15% mitigation. And then whenever we threw on medium armor, this changed slightly. I was getting hit for 1,160 without fortification, with fortification 966, for a difference of 194, and I was mitigating about 17% damage in medium armor. Then we threw on heavy, and we tried heavy with just a couple of light pieces just to reduce our damage mitigation a little bit, or our overall damage mitigation a little bit. We were still in the heavy armor load, or the heavy equip load, but I was getting hit by 1,070 with 896 whenever I had fortification buff. The difference was 174, which means I was mitigating about 16% damage. And then I just went full on heavy. So every single piece I had on was heavy. I was getting hit for 1,001 damage, 847 whenever I had the Fortify buff with a difference of 154, which means I was mitigating about 15% damage, which is exactly what you would expect. All of these numbers are in the neighborhood. That's what you would expect when you get a 15% Fortify buff. There's some other math in there, obviously, that changes these a little bit, but you get the picture. You're mitigating about 15% damage across the board in all armor weights. What is very interesting, though, is you see how this scales down. Light armor gives you more mitigation with fortification currently on live, and then heavy armor gives you less mitigation with Fortify buff. And that is completely flipped on the PTR. So now let's take a look at the PTR numbers, because this is going to be absolutely mind-blowing to you. This is actually pretty wild. So if we take a look at the PTR numbers, whenever I was in light armor, I was getting hit by 689. And then with a 15% Fortify, it was 670, of a difference of 19. I was only mitigating 2.76% damage in light armor. So if we compare this with the live test that we did with the same weight class, we were getting hit by 17% damage. That drops all the way to 2.76. Now, there are other factors at play because my armor wasn't exactly the same, had different perks, all that jazz. But nonetheless, the point stays true here in that we are losing a ton of mitigation with Fortify. It has been heavily nerfed. So it's pretty crazy. You're losing about 15% damage, and that is with a 15% Fortify buff. So bear in mind, if you're running a light armor build with 5 pieces of shirking fortification, and each piece gives you 3.8 to 3.9% of fortification every time you dodge, roll through, an attack, that's going to give you roughly like 19% Fortify, or a 19% Fortify buff every time you roll through an attack. Now, bear in mind that this is 15%, and it's only a 2.76% mitigation with a 15% Fortify buff on you. So whenever you're rolling around in 5 pieces of shirking fort, you're only going to be mitigating like maybe 3.5% of damage. So you make that call whether or not you think shirking fort is going to be worth it on your light armor or not. To me, I think it's not going to be. I don't think the meta is going to be lying in shirking fort anymore. I just don't think that damage mitigation is going to be worth it. But let's keep moving. Let's keep looking to see if this gets any better. So now we look at our medium category, and you can see here we got hit for about 678 damage. And then with fortification on it was 655, which gives us a damage mitigation, or a difference of 23 damage that we mitigated, or 3.4% damage. So again, we compare that to live of a 16% damage mitigation, almost 17% damage mitigation. You can see that fortification is just getting hammered really hard here. It's getting nerfed across the board. Then we're going to take a look at heavy. So whenever we go into the heavy class, we did the same thing. We tested this with a couple of pieces of light armor just to have a little bit less mitigation, to see that this did in fact scale with your armor rating and not just the weight class. That's kind of what I was testing, what I wanted to see. At first, I thought it was just going to scale with whether or not you were in light, medium, or heavy equip load. That's not the case. It actually scales on your armor rating. So the higher armor you have, the more fortification buff you are going to be able to receive. So if we're in heavy with 2 pieces of light, we got hit for 555. Fortify buff brought that down to 528, difference of 27, and we mitigated almost 5% damage. And then if we're in full heavy, it goes up just a little bit by about half a percentage point to mitigating 5.26 damage. So as you can see here, fortification is getting nerfed pretty heavily on the PTR, and this is going to affect a lot of builds across the board. Most everyone right now is running shirking fort in their build. I don't know that that's going to be meta at all after this. It just doesn't seem like it's going to be worth, but bear in mind, this is on the PTR. Some of these things could change. We don't know. I do think it's going to get nerfed pretty heavily regardless though, but that's it. Those are the numbers. But we worked on this for quite a while today to make sure that this test was accurate, and these numbers are pretty solid. So fortification is just getting heavily hit across all weight classes. It doesn't matter because now it's scaling heavily off of your armor rating, and it's not anymore just like a flat mitigation percentage. It is a scaling percentage. It scales up the higher that you're in, and it just got completely nerfed almost into the ground. So that's it. Just be aware. You might want to start prepping now. You might want to start filling out some builds with maybe some elemental aversion, some physical aversion. I don't know, some refreshing, some resilient. I don't know, some other pieces. You may not want to run shirking fort anymore, but that's the results. That's what we found. It's pretty crazy. It's a pretty large reduction in mitigation. We are going to be testing crit damage because that got hit pretty hard on the PTR as well. I'll be testing that along with some resilient changes, and I'll upload that video here for you guys to check that out. I'll show you my findings there as well. We'll post that a little bit later this week, but that'll do it for for this one, boys and girls. I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, just like New World content in general, I'd appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. That'd be amazing. Help me out a ton. But yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next one.